I see a little red light. So this is Chapter 11, Part 2.
What's part 1?
That was Tuesday.
Really?
Yeah.
Shall I get far?
Remember Tuesday?
I was missing in action.
I know.
So this is what, chapter 11? What?
Chapter 11, study questions.
How far did I get to it?
Halfway. We got through principle 1 through 10.
Let me get this.
And I recorded it, so I haven't posted it yet, since it's cut in half.
All right.
So it'll be posted. It takes it about 3 or 4 hours to upload to YouTube.
Really?
Once I download it, or whatever load you want to call it, to the C drive on my computer. That's the quick part. The hard part is the, going to YouTube. So that's what takes the time. That's why it's not posted this evening. It'll be posted tomorrow. Okay. We got as far as principle 10. And let's see, where am I? I am lost. I've been reading so many different books just to get this stuff. Okay, principle 10. What is it? Easements. Jacob, read it.
Surveyors should never agree to locate all existing easements relating to and affecting property. The surveyor should merely agree to locate those easements in accordance with furnished descriptions and those easements that are visible or of public record.
Okay. Why?
For one, there can be a lot of them.
How many? How many easements can there be on one piece of property?
There's no number.
It could almost be infinite. Because you can have on the same strip, like just adjacent to the right-of-way, you can have an easement, literally for minerals. You could then have an easement for water line. You could have an easement for telephone line.
I thought all that had to be put on there.
Who knows about it? What kind of easement? What about an easement for someone to cross over it? What if it's an easement between the man and his neighbor and it's not written down? It's just a handshake deal. That's an easement.
I understand, but something like that, but I mean everything that's...
What if
recorded.
it's so far back that it may not be recorded? Or the location of the original easement is changed, or the original description is changed, and the new usage, the easement will follow the usage, right? So what if they change the location of the county road, and then the easement follows the right-of-way, the property and the edge of the property and the right-of-way? What if that is no longer as it was described in the original? What I'm getting at, by the way, the courthouse burned.
Huh?
The courthouse burned too.
What courthouse?
The court, where the original record was kept.
Oh.
Yeah. Basically, the essential legal point is, whose responsibility is it to know whether there's an easement or not?
Owner of the property.
The owner of the property, because it has to do with his title. So it's his responsibility to provide the surveyor with whatever evidence, whether it's verbal or written, whether it's a document or not. That has saved, that idea there has saved a lot of surveyors who didn't pick up on, say, the gas line signs that were 2 properties over on the right-of-way. That still means, this is why it's so important for the surveyor to trust his field crew. so that they will know to keep an eye out for things like that. An eye out for power lines going over. Not necessarily power poles, but if the power line crosses the property. It must, it should be noted. Rural areas, sometimes there was no easement written down. It was just gee, we sure are glad Texas Power and Light is running power to our place, and sure, you can run that line over our property. We're just real glad to have electrical power. A lot of places didn't get rural electric power until the mid-50s or later. So the easement may be there. It may be actually in the county records. And that's why a very thorough research of the records. Somebody didn't understand what I was saying the other night. I talked about a reverse index. It's a book. You're old enough to have used the book. Now when you search, you don't have to use the book. I like the book because, unless something gets torn out of the book, it never, ever, ever disappears. How easy is it to make a computer record go away?
Easy as a push of a button.
It can be done. This is why, fortunately, a lot of records they're still being kept in a paper base. I don't know how much longer that's going to be, but it's a comfort to me to know that stuff does exist, even if it is a big fire hazard. But it's the property owner's responsibility to provide the surveyor with the information on the easements. That doesn't mean that it's not malpractice not to shoot something that's evident and visible. A power line crossing, a gas pipeline crossing the property, even though there's no record of it in the deed records for that property. That might just be an oversight. So anyway, that was 10. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was trying to make my Principle 10 question be Principle 10, and that didn't work. Why should you not guarantee to locate all easements? That's my study question.
There could be too many of them. It'd be time consuming to research.
Well, time consuming is not the issue. How can you guarantee to locate all easements?
You can't.
You can't. Literally. There might be a dead body on the place. There might be an old grave. What kind of easement does a grave site have in the state of Texas?
Yeah, it does, because you have to survey the spots and everything.
Okay, keep going. Follow that line of reasoning.
Man, I can't remember.
In terms of easements, it's about the most important. Because how long does that easement last?
Should last forever.
In secula seculorum.
How are the easements? I thought they were actual lots.
No. If there's a body buried on the place, like from pioneer days, like 1920, whatever, people did that. They didn't want the trouble to go into town or to the county or wherever to put the body. So there are old family plots. The family's been gone forever, but what easement does the dearly departed have on that piece of land?
I know we worked on that stuff over there in Fort, what is that, for McCabbage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the original cavalry.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
graves and the bodies and
Right.
everything else, but I forgot what it was called.
Yeah. I love this. Quiet enjoyment.
Really?
Yeah. The body has a right to be undisturbed and to have quiet enjoyment for all eternity. Who can trump the easement that a grave has?
State.
Under what circumstances?
Building a highway, building a road?
Not necessarily.
Really?
Yeah. They might, but they certainly, and this has been fairly recent in the last few years. They don't have the right to just condemn the land outright.
Right.
Or what they try, and this happened in Dallas. It was wonderful. The city, there are old maps. There are plenty of old maps going back to the 1880s, and the brand. If you've ever been in Dallas, if you've ever driven on Central Expressway, well, it used to come into town and then sort of hang an easterly route and then follow a city street. It was, it followed an old railroad track. That's the point of Central Expressway. Now, when they did the expansion of Central Expressway so that it could go directly to I-35 east, and they were putting in, like DART light rail, rapid transit. They went through what was called the State Hall Thomas neighborhood, which was an old black neighborhood with old black churches and, more importantly, old black cemeteries, not too well marked. And the very first thing when they started moving dirt, they started finding bones. And the contractor, being a good steward of the public funds, decided to see that the bones were moved at night, without a whole lot of publicity. Well, it hit the rotary oscillator pretty quick. And people were up in arms because they would not have tried that with a white cemetery. And so the net result was a whole brand new set of rules on what would happen, what happens when you need to move a grave. And now it costs, with all of the regulations, which funeral directors, amazingly enough, wrote, costs about 30 grand per grave to move graves. And you have to have an absolutely superior reason.
What about for housing?
For housing? Okay. Didn't you ever see, what was that movie? Poltergeist. Not a good idea. No, 30,000 a grave. Because the dearly departed has the right to quiet enjoyment of that place. And, black, white, whatever race, they have the right to set there. That's one of the reasons that surveyors are now required to locate, if they see evidence of an old grave, they are required to note the location and report it. That's part of the Natural Resources Code.
Wow.
So I think it's either Natural Resources or Local Government Code. But basically, surveyors are now required, if they see that, they must turn in location.
So they can't build on it.
That's the idea. And it causes the rerouting of all sorts of roads. It usually doesn't happen with interstate highways because they do a fairly good job. I mean, we're basically through building interstate highways. We've pretty much got all of them built that need to be built. But the idea of, like I said, it is the property owner's responsibility to literally know where the bodies are buried. If there is a grave on his property, he's the one who should know about it. So, do people always honestly report such things?
No.
Of course not.
So if the owner of the property knows,
Yeah. And
can he build whatever he wants there? It's his
no,
cemetery?
if he knows,
If
no,
it's
he
his
may
cemetery?
not. Well, if it's his cemetery, why would he? Okay, it's not his cemetery. The land is his. The dearly departed has an eternal easement on that piece of land. The necessity for that easement does not go away with the passing of time. His bones have the right to stay there. That's one of the nice things about Texas law. They're real insistent on that. So as far as the rest of the country, I'm not real sure. But, I only brought up the idea of a cemetery because that's the ultimate easement on a property. It doesn't go away. Those bones will be there forever. Unless the river rises and washes them away, in which case, that's a whole different issue. You've seen many rivers around here? Neither have I. Okay, Principle 11. Now, we've heard before why that all corners are of equal importance in a description. Doesn't the first one have precedence? The point of beginning, doesn't that have preference and precedence?
I would think so.
You would think so, but they don't. Okay, in actual fact, it's that very first one that's the first one to get knocked out.
Oh, yeah.
And so you spend a lot of time looking for it, it's not there. Every point is of equal importance.
What about a section corner that's called for? Section
That's
type.
real important.
Section type.
But is it any more important to that parcel than any other? Now, it's real important to the section, that parcel, but what about the quarter section? Is that section corner any more important to that parcel than any of the other corners? No. So you have to think of it in terms of each parcel, like nesting, like those little Russian nesting dolls, or, a checkerboard, however you want to consider it. Each parcel, those corners of that parcel are of equal importance, even if it's the initial point for the entire rectangular survey.
What if it's not? If it's not, like say it doesn't share a corner with the track. Like it's the northeast corner of a section, and you're tying to it from your track, but it doesn't share a corner.
Oh, it's like a, what do you
type.
call that? What do you call those things? They're called corner accessories? You're tying to it, or are you saying that it's a commencing point?
Yeah.
A commencing point is not in the parcel. So if you have commencing at the northwest corner, I guess for you, northwest corner of section 5, and then proceeding east along the north line of said section 5 to the quarter section monument, or to a point somewhere along there. The commencing point for the survey is not the beginning point for the parcel. It's just a real convenient place so that everybody should be able to find it.
But it's in the description.
It's in the description, but it's not a part of the parcel.
It's not always correct either in the most surveys.
Now you're going and borrowing trouble.
But it's not. I mean, it's just
I know.
It's something to reference to get
Basically,
you to that parcel.
you gotta start somewhere, and preferably starting someplace where people are liable to find it.
Yeah.
They're liable to know where the common corner of railroad, TP&R, TNP, Texas and Pacific Railway, block H, section 5. They know where block H corner is, the northeast, so you can start there. Now, whether or not anybody ever bothered to set any of the section corners is another question. But if you start at a commencing point that a surveyor, or preferably people in the area, know and recognize, but that commencing point is not a part of that parcel, it's just a means of locating the first corner of the parcel. Is that making sense? Okay. Because it's just, you're worried about the parcel, but that commencing call gives you a great place to start.
Yeah.
And all patent surveys in Texas used to start with a call from the corner of some known, say, this is in the eastern part of the state. And then you would go such and such bearing so many varas to the beginning point of this survey. And all patent surveys in the state of Texas were required to start at some known point and then go to an adjacent, patented survey. You couldn't leave a gap between patented surveys. This is why that Stafford v. King is such an important case, because if you follow the descriptions of the so-called surveyor, he left a big gap between the corner he started at and the corner of the new patent survey. There's this large hiatus between those two surveys if you follow his description. Okay. 12. How does senior rights control over record or legal monuments? What is the distinction between a record and a legal monument? And how can it be that there is no written record of separation from the sovereign? Look at point 12, or principle 12.
That'll go on forever.
Yeah, it does. I'm just saying, look at principle 12 in the front. No, principle 12, it's at the front of the chapter. Or you can read it in the body. It doesn't matter. Oh, by the way, when you're reading this book, if something's in a box, it's really important. I would like to see business law be a requirement for getting an associate's in surveying, because that might just keep you out of a little bit of hot water. And in the box it says, without a written executed contract, do not sue to collect a fee. In most instances, you will lose. That's aside from principle 12. It's real hard. A verbal contract is worth the paper it's written on. That's the old saying. And you can't collect on an unwritten contract. It's almost impossible. Okay, principle 12. Except where a senior right is interfered with, record or legal monuments, if called for in a conveyance, and if found undisturbed, indicate the true intent of the original parties and as such control. Pretty much what we've been saying all semester. If you find the original monument and you determine that it is undisturbed, how do you determine if it's undisturbed? You've got a lot of experience with disturbed and undisturbed monuments.
Undisturbed, usually like a rock mound, you can tell if the rocks are old or pipe.
Mm-hmm. If it looks right,
Yeah,
feels right, and
yeah,
smells
not
right.
Not necessarily by the distance or bearing.
Yeah.
It's more about what you found on the field in the past.
Yeah.
The rocks, the new rocks and old rocks look a lot different when you take
Yeah.
them off.
The weathering, whether at the bottom of the pile of rocks you find the flat rock with the X on the bottom, just like it was called for in the original. I have a talent for getting to the location of a survey and finding, like the half-inch iron rod sticking up that has absolutely nothing to do with that parcel. Now, it's sitting right next to that parcel. Nobody knows what it's for, but I find it right off the bat.
Somebody in your corner.
Yeah, I have no idea. It might have been something that the highway department put in as an elevation.
I find them too, and then I go around 50 to 100 feet in a circle.
Yeah, But no, it's just because you find something, does the original description call for the half-inch iron rod? If you find a half-inch iron rod where you think the rock mound ought to be and you don't find a rock mound, what do?
Look some more.
You look some more, or you find older surveys, if possible. Not all surveys are recorded. So it may, this is one of those times where you may just, since nowadays, if a surveyor puts a property if he locates a property corner and drives a half-inch iron rod into the ground, he's gonna put a plastic cap on it. That's required. So at least you can find out whose RPLS number that is. Call the board and see, is this person still alive? Can I talk to him? So even if it's not quite of record, you might be able to get information from that surveyor. But we could spend weeks on original monument as described undisturbed, because exactly how much variance from that you can get, and it's still original monument as described undisturbed. Later on in the chat, I brought in a thing from Clark on boundaries and surveying, and it was talking about a section corner not found, but we'll take that later. Now, second part, if called for monuments cannot be found, or if they are found disturbed, their former position can be identified by competent witness testimony or acceptable physical indicators of boundaries. What acceptable indicators of boundaries? Fences, roads, right-of-ways. Remember invisible monuments? A line formed by two monuments not on the parcel that's determining one of the boundaries of the parcel. Parole evidence it's hard to judge. And if someone knows enough about a parcel to know where the boundary is, they probably have an interest in it. So is it unbiased? No.
Nope.
Okay. Okay, since you've got more field experience than anybody else, take Principle 13 and read that. That's page 328 in this book.
Okay. The surveyor should hunt and search in the field until the best available evidence is found on which to base the boundary retracement survey. Time should not be a consideration.
How good a salesman are you?
Me? Pretty good.
Yeah. How long does it take to find the original monument?
How long does it take?
It takes as long as it takes. Does that give you an excuse for the coffee break? Continuous coffee break in the van now. How many times do you run the closure on the parcel just to make sure you're right?
Yeah, but it's good to go back to the truck and clear your head.
Occasionally, yeah. Of course, occasionally, the van is nothing but a source of confusion. When you start, if you've got multiple deeds not reading the same. Have you ever had deeds where calls were reversed?
Yeah.
Happens all, I won't say it happens all the time, thank God it doesn't. But it's not until you get that wonderful little aha moment that, okay, if I just reverse this, because it sure does look like that fence is going on further than it should. but there is no way to predict how long it will take to find a monument. Particularly when wrong ones are flagged up in plain view.
So how long should you take? Really?
There's,
Does it depend what you
there's-
quoted?
well, okay, no, you should not, well,
I mean, because I know
You
sometimes
shouldn't
you quote a job and
yeah,
you're like,
yeah, well, when I was in the field, nobody asked me to quote a job. Sometimes they would ask me how long it would take to topo something. Once the boundary was done, yeah, that's pretty easy. If you've gone out to the site and you know, if you've gone out to the site and looked, how long should it take you to find the corners? How do you know?
well, usually you should know. If there's an area you've been pretty close, 5, 6 miles away, 3 miles away, you can break it down a little bit.
Mhm.
You've never been
Not
there
every
before?
place, not every place in Texas or anywhere else has rectangular surveys.
I understand that, but there's different ways to go in there and find
Mhm.
a monument a lot faster.
Yeah,
They go to the railroad operation.
particularly nowadays. Yeah, it's faster.
Yeah.
But if
Get
there's
ties from your wells.
if
start
there is
there.
a monument that has just taken a perverse attitude that it will not be found, how long does it take to find something that's just far enough out? 10 feet sometimes is enough to make
Yeah.
something almost, I'm not saying it's unfindable, but it's not where you're looking. I caught heat one time because we were working on a survey that crossed the San Gabriel River. What's wrong with that sentence?
River. Cross.
It crossed the San Gabriel River. It shouldn't, and no patent survey crosses a navigable stream. This one claims to. And so, I came up with figures based on my GPS, and our RPLS came up with different figures based on the survey that was on the other side of the river that this one adjoined to. And my figures and his figures disagreed by about 15, 20 feet as far as the location of the property corners. Well, that 20 or 30 feet was from the high bank of the river going down the slope, towards the river. And from the high bank all the way down was extremely heavy tree growth, which means my little GPS did not work in there. And that's what I was using. And the other, I had to come in from the other side. He'd already flagged up all these points, thumbing his nose at me saying, well, you should have flagged those up. Well, that's not where I was looking. Because I was looking another 20 feet towards the river. And guess what? They were there. I just couldn't find them with the GPS. And they were not forthcoming. You had to know exactly where they were. I calculated my points based on my coordinates from across the river, and everything worked out. It still left a gap between the pins on this one lot and the extent of the survey crossing the San Gabriel.
So did it cross the river or not?
According to the measurements and according to the description, it crossed the river. And it followed the bank, and then it went back across the river. So maybe the San Gabriel River didn't run, but usually a river, like erodes away a bank. It doesn't deposit a big high bank completely, with old-looking soil. So somewhere along the line, that survey got totally messed up. But the net result is, how long does it take? It takes as long as it takes. And you can get a very bad reputation for doing good work.
Yeah, especially when you give him that bill,
Yeah.
4,000 or 5,000 for a little bitty job, and he's
Yeah. And Dow Kelly, one of the local surveyors, was telling me about a job that he had inherited, and it's further to the east. But they had the previous surveyor, the one who got fired, had just done a magnificent job locating stuff. Based on very old patent survey work, no relation to current fence lines or claims of ownership. But he found the original points, not to the advantage of the person who hired him. So that surveyor one got fired. Dow looked at it and pronounced it correct. And so, the client was doubly miffed. But apparently, this guy had done his work really, really well, presented a big bill, and probably got pretty well stiffed for it, because it did not give the client what he thought he should have been getting. It located old work, and there's nothing harder to locate than something essentially in a swamp. If you've got a large, where a river makes a delta, it can be a very large thing. You may not know what stream, what tributary of what river you're on. You can be off by many hundreds of feet, and the original description can be wrong because it's simply, misdescribed. But if you follow it and come to this stream at the place where it should be, just because it's not the correct name as we use nowadays doesn't mean that it's not a boundary. Good morning. Don't worry, it's on tape. You'll get to listen to it again. I know I'm boring, but I'm not that boring. But anyway, this whole thing about time not being a consideration, that's a real hard sell. And it's, your field crew can make you or break you. And as a surveyor, you're gonna, hopefully you will spend enough time in the field to know when your crew is telling you the truth about how long it takes them to do things. I don't like the idea of people getting licenses without having been in the field. I think it's not only do I not like it, I think it's a very bad idea. Because how can you tell someone how to do their job if you don't know how to do it? That gives that individual crew too much influence over the quality of the work. If they say we've looked and we can't find it, you then have to take that information and come up with a point. What if that point is still there and they're just being lazy? Not all field crews are lazy, but there are, lots of field crews need a little bit of, encouragement and maybe a good suggestion on how to proceed. This is why the idea of direct control over the work is important. And I'm not saying, if you look at the regs on direct control over the field work, they leave out a lot. What if what if me, surveyor, has a field crew whose language exclusively is Spanish? What would happen if I attempted to give instructions to that field crew? They'd be lucky to be in the right county by the time they got to their job. So, what about the idea of an interpreter? Does that break the direct control, over from surveyor to field crew? Because you have to be in direct control over the work as a surveyor in Texas, ethically. Does that break that chain?
It does.
It does, right?
No, does it, or
To a certain point.
is he simply acting as an interpreter?
How do you know
Interpreter.
that interpreter's telling them the right stuff.
Well, we've had good luck with interpreters in Texas since the days of Coronado. Coronado's interpreter on his little trek through the Southwest all the way up to Kansas, he was dependent on his interpreter, and his interpreter was a lying son of a gun. And so they would stop and ask the natives, directions, and God knows what the interpreter was actually saying to the Indians. But the net result was he got Coronado really well lost. One interpretation was that the Spanish word for silver is cibola. The Spanish word for onion is cebola. It's entirely possible that Coronado went all through the Southwest asking Indians where the onion fields were. You laugh. It's actually been proposed. But anyway, the amount of time that it takes to find the original monument is impossible to predict. If it is a well-established subdivision, if your company laid out the subdivision, you don't have much leg to stand on saying it took me 2 days to find that. If your property adjoins, say, BLM land or what do they call that? Corps of Engineers. It's great when you're up against a Corps of Engineer land because they monument their stuff so well. You can't claim that it takes 2 days to find the monuments next to a Corps of Engineer property. There's a big fence. It's got 6 strands of very good barbed wire. It's got 3-inch steel pipe. And then at every PI in the fence, you have a Corps of Engineer monument with a brass cap. It doesn't take you that long to find those monuments. How long does it take to find a monument that's a Twitchell set in 1910? A mound.
It'll take a long time.
Probably won't find it.
You could be standing on it and you wouldn't know you were on it. The evidence has gone away. It was assumed when most of these corners were set that the new owner would then establish a nice monument, like a fence post. That's a great place to start. In the sectionalized, in the PLSS states, it was assumed that the new owners would at least mark the son of a gun. Nobody is going to depend on a pit and 2 or 3 mounds or 4 mounds for hundreds of years. It's fortunate that they chose on the prairie to use. Why is it easy, or how can you find where a pit was dug, say in 1910? 2 foot wide, 2 foot deep. How can you find that pit nowadays? Nowadays, if it's undisturbed.
Debris.
Vegetation.
Exactly. What do you find?
Cattails.
Cattails in the prairie. You look for something different. You actually listened in the first semester when I described that. Yeah, you find there's something different, and if you dig a pit, that's where the water goes. And where the water goes, little cattails go. And you see that in all those little BLM publications. This is what you look for if the original called for a mound or for a pit and mounds. So it was assumed that the new owners would come and stick something a little bit more stable and useful, like a big, of course, how far away is the nearest tree for them to cut to make a post? Well, that's another story. If you're in Kansas, you got to order one mail order because there just weren't many forests around. Let's see. This whole idea of how long does it take, it's impossible to predict. That's not an excuse for taking, for sandbagging the client. But sometimes it's just impossible to predict how long it takes to find a monument. This is why it's so good. When I keep talking about everybody starting out ought to have a Marvin. Marvin was my original crew chief, and he had 30 years of experience. And he had a feel for where corners could be found. And it wasn't always on the fence line either. And occasionally, it was not just on the fence line, but he could see this little piece, the little tip of the half-inch iron rod that looked exactly like a pebble in the concrete holding the iron, the steel fence post. Have you ever found the tip of a rod perfectly flush with the concrete holding the 2-inch iron pipe or iron steel fence post? It looks exactly like a black pea gravel that was used to mix the concrete, but it's part of the rod. And if you scratch it just right, you can tell it's steel. And you could use your pin finder from now until doomsday, but because you've got a 2-inch steel fence post, all you're going to get is wing. It's not going to give you any useful information. It was the patience involved in taking the whisk broom and cleaning off that piece of concrete. And a lot of field work is nothing more than stubbornness. So, like I said, everybody in training ought to have a Marvin or some such person. Not me. In fact, I think I left my phone.
Right there.
Oh, good. No nasty grams this evening. Time should not be a consideration. He says that in so many different places in that book. It's impossible to predict. Okay, Principle 14. Tina, you've been too quiet.
Possession may memorialize original survey lines and as such may be the best or the worst evidence of original lines.
Okay, possession. Demonic? What sort of possession? What do you find?
Fenced in area.
Fenced in area? What else?
Plowed field. Cotton field.
Okay. The edge of cultivation. What else? What's the most obvious?
River. Water banks.
Well, no.
Right away for a road.
Well, right away for a road, that's one. What's another dividing property sort of thing that you might find to indicate possession? And I hope you didn't already mention it because I may have not heard you. What do you go look for dividing property lines? Fences. Did you already say that? Okay, I missed it. Okay, fences. What kind of fences?
Wood fences, barbed wire.
Barbed wire. When you describe a fence between 2 points, you don't just write down, like on your drawing, you write down, you got a line, and if it's a barbed wire fence, you put little X's in it. If it's a wooden fence, you got the little 2 diagonals and all that. And if it's a chain link fence, you got another symbol for that. If it's a barbed wire fence, do you indicate in your field description how many strands of wire are on the fence?
We don't.
We used to. And it's not a bad idea, because that's another clue for the poor dumb son of a gun who has to follow you in 20 years, that the fence he's looking at is not the fence you looked at. As far as fences go, there are surveyors who maintain libraries of barbed wire. And out here, you've got people, This was one of the original markets for barbed wire. And if the deed calls for a barbed wire fence in 1910, and you see a piece of barbed wire that wasn't invented until 1947, what does that tell you?
The fence has been.
The fence is not the original fence. So are
It
you
could
at
be
liberty?
the original fence line.
It could be the fence line. How do people build fences out in areas where land is not that expensive and barbed wire is? When they're building a fence, how do they generally do it? Or how do they frequently do it?
Offset.
Offset what?
The post from the ski.
The old
I'm
fence.
getting half of an idea here.
The old fence.
Okay, you got the old fence.
Mhm.
Where is my? I
They'll-
used to
they'll
have.
build in from
I
the
used
old
to have a
fence.
pencil. Thank you.
I've seen them just build on the same spot over and over.
Okay, that's one way. Another way is to simply clear out alongside of the fence, and then, like 5 feet away, put in a new fence, and then clear out the old fence.
That takes too much money and time, though.
Not necessarily if they're not using the old fence posts. If the old fence posts are just trash, which frequently happens, I mean, you don't have enough wood left to have anything taller than that. When you bury them in the ground, they rot. Sometimes they'll build new fences right alongside of the old fences. And sometimes you'll actually see, like an offset at the corner, where the old big fence corner is. The fence doesn't go up to it. It goes up to a point, and then it jogs over. That's a dead giveaway. That fence is not on the original line. It's a very dangerous call to make in the absence of original monumentations. That just means you looked enough to where you thought it wasn't worth your while to look any further. What happens if Surveyor B comes along and finds that original monumentation? I'm not getting nobody's answering. Nobody's venturing a guess. You are Surveyor A, you were working for Client A. Surveyor B comes along working for Client B.
Client B or not Client A again?
No, he's working for Client B, the guy on the other side of the fence. And you say, in the absence of the original monumentation, I hold this fence line. And then Surveyor B finds, buried under 4 feet of dirt, like 10 feet down the fence line, and he took pictures of it too. Buried stone, it wouldn't show up on with a pin finder. Stones.
I guess you go back, shoot it in, give an amended plat or something.
Well, the question is, if B sues A to collect on, or A built the fence on the line that you projected, right? Into B's property, right? Okay. B sues A, your client, or the one that you were working for. B's property was diminished by that 10 or 20 feet for a distance of 1 mile. Figure the acreage on that. Now figure if B goes to court and compels A to tear down the fence or to move the fence. Who bears the expense? Both
Okay.
parties?
But if he found that one corner, right, I know what you're saying.
Yeah, he found
The original corner.
monumentation.
But being the Surveyor A, I mean, he wouldn't just miss out on one corner. He'd have to tie his adjoiners in and stuff in order
Yeah.
to just. So they'd have to both go in there. I mean, that original corner could be wrong.
Well, an original corner is assumed to be right, particularly when it's buried.
Assumed though.
Yeah.
It all depends on the courts, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's, and the courts say, okay, it's where the monument is, that line. And your line, since you followed the original fence line, or you followed, Surveyor A followed the existing fence line, and the existing fence line is not on the property line, but is the original line is like, let's call it 20 feet. In the fence line is 20 feet into property B. It's an intrusion into
20 feet's
property
a
B.
lot.
20 feet's a lot.
You figured that he would have figured that out.
Well, yeah, you should, but how well were they surveyed originally is another question.
Well, exactly. Couldn't that one corner be wrong also?
It could be, but if you find the original monumentation for it, what do you have to do? And, sometimes, who decides in a case like this? Do you go to small claims court to get it settled for the value of the fence? What is the venue in Texas for any issue of title?
District court.
District court, yeah. And that's an expensive place to visit. But no, it has to go to court. Who decides if it does go to court? Who decides what the boundary is?
Judge or jury.
More precisely, the jury. The jury is the trier of the fact. And as long as we are in the state of Texas, they have the right to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
You can go the position of the original monument or long-term